Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Dave's Faves. And today I want to talk about Mozart again and some works that we've discussed previously in this series. But as I always said, there will be some duplications because I'm really choosing not just individual works, but also individual albums of singular importance and significance. And this is certainly one. It is the Mozart Last Six Symphonies and Eine kleine Nachtmusik, conducted by Pablo Casals with the Marlborough Festival Orchestra and the Casals Festival Orchestra of Puerto Rico. Now, these are hard to come by. There is one disc of the Marlborough stuff, I think it's the Hofner and 40 and 41, that's still available on Sony, because I was just checking on Amazon to see if maybe some of this stuff was still around. But this set, as you can see, is Japanese Columbia, and I got it, oh gosh, decades ago. So it's part of the Pablo Casals, the Immortal Monument of Music 3 series, and we desperately need a new Casals edition. A really complete Casals edition, one with his solo stuff and all of the pieces he conducted, especially at Marlborough. All of that stuff is on Sony. The problem with it, I think, is that it's a variety of things. You get Marlborough, you get the Prod Festival, and you get the Casals Festival in Puerto Rico. And these are often live recordings. They are in wildly variable sound. Some of it pretty wildly lousy sound, but it doesn't really matter because these historical collections are important and collectors want them. I mean, really, if Sony could put out a huge box of, 60 discs or so of Dmitri Mitropoulos, then they can certainly do Pablo Casals, who is, enormously more famous than Dmitri Mitropoulos ever was. And I think more in demand as well. So we'll see what happens. Maybe something will come. I don't see any reason why it should not. But his conducting was just as remarkable as his cello playing, in some ways better, because, remember, Casals was born in 1876. He died in 1973. So when he was making records that were sort of listenable, we're talking about basically the 50s. He was up there. And his technique was not what it had been. It wasn't terrible, but he always had a somewhat wiry tone. Not because he didn't use vibrato, by the way. There is a textbook on cello technique endorsed by him, which is totally open in its endorsement of virtually continuous vibrato. So let's not go there. His tone was his tone. He had his own manner of speaking, shall we say. It was austere, definitely. It was not sexy. It was incredibly direct. He was a musician of, well, the only one I can really compare him to is Sándor Vég, one of those performer, conductor musicians who was a musician in his totality. Everything he did, every thought, everything he touched was musical. But as a performer and as a conductor, he limited himself, as did Sándor Vég in some respects. Sándor Vég did some contemporary stuff, but Casals largely limited himself to the German classics, to, Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven. He did some romantic stuff, some Schumann, some, Mendelssohn, things like that. Brahms, of course, the solo sonatas. So there were, other things. He did Schubert. He stuck to the standard classical repertoire. And I think the reason is because that was, of course, the music that spoke to him most eloquently, but it was also the kind of person he was. He was a classicist to the bone. He needed that sense of larger architecture, the perfection of form that you project through your overall conception of the work, and not attention to moment-by-moment detail. He was a line guy, in other words, a contrapuntist, not a chord guy, not somebody who went in for sensuality of tone. I mean, that was the kind of artist he was. And he may have been, in the 20th century, one of the one or two really greatest of that kind. like Sell and like Chandor Vague and like some of these others. But at the same time, although he was a line guy, he projected everything he did with just unbelievable humanity and expressive rightness and warmth of conception. I mean, not, sometimes the sound could be a little acerbic, especially when he was very old. And that's just the way it was. It was a technical issue. It wasn't because, the musicality and the intellect wasn't behind what he was doing. And you can hear that. You can hear that when you take in his performances in their totality. And these Mozart symphonies are simply magnificent. They really, really are. They breathe. They are vocal, which is always the key to Mozart. The music always has to sing. And Casals understood that, like, few people have. And they do sing. Even if the playing isn't always great, even if the sound isn't always perfect, they really, really communicate. And I love this set. I mean, there were these two Japanese Sony sets. There was the Zell Mozart box was part of this series, this Japanese Sony series. And that was also absolutely essential. And there was no other way to get that music back in the day. Because there were some essential classics, Sony things, and some duplication. But even before that stuff showed up, Zell was out of print, Casals was out of print, and these are classic performances. And I'm only bringing them to your attention so that, those of you who have them already know you can still get that one Mozart disc. And there's also a disc of Mozart Serenades that's quite nice, and there's other Mozart stuff. But get the late symphonies and listen to them with the Marlborough Festival Orchestra. They're just as good. We've talked about his Beethoven with the Marlborough Festival Orchestra too. He did 1, 6, 7, and 8 at least, maybe another one. They're really, really extraordinary mementos of an incredibly great musician who was able to communicate as a conductor the same kind of humane intensity that he did as a performer. And that's really quite a gift. It says something about the man, and boy, you're going to enjoy these Mozart performances if they ever show up again. So here's my plug for the Casals Mozart and the Casals everything else. Sony, get that box going. Keep on listening, friends. Thank you for joining me. Take care.